good thing about being a moderator is that I get the first question. So my question would be, how do you feel on, are we moving to a world of, like, it feels like we're somehow moving to a world where liquidity is not going to be scarce anymore, but abundant. What do you feel about that, and what are the implications?
Well, personally, I'm excited about the prospect of people not being able to make money on money, but being able to make money on risk. I think that would actually be a healthy thing for the economies of the world and for business and for a lot of things. That'd be my first response. My second is that I think a change in the existing monetary environments and the economic environments is kind of going to happen whether anybody wants it to or not. The fact that you see this space as active as it is kind of illustrates that people feel in general that there's some problems that they're not happy with that need to be corrected. What that will actually look like, I'm not sure. I have no idea. But I do believe that we are moving into a world where liquidity is going to be easier, particularly for people in developing nations or, at the lower end of the spectrum of financeability today.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I want to pick up where Scott left off because I think, you can kind of you can contemplate that question one way or another in a developed world, but if you go to a world where things really are not working very well, you realize that something really does need to be done. And the economic drains in third world countries, and I don't know about elsewhere in the world, but I deal with Ukraine a lot, for example. The burdens on economics are huge, and consequently, there's all kinds of things that make the economics less effective. Hoarding, trying to constantly, convert local currency into some foreign currency that is more stable, mistrust, corruption, and all of that. And so when you ask the question about a lot of liquidity, really, for me, that translates into the question of a lot of value. Now, is there a lot of value? Yes. How do you make that value safely representable in a functioning economic system in which people can do good things and enjoy the results of their actions? There's no question that you want a lot of liquidity, but the question is, how do you move to a situation where that's stable and money comes from value and doesn't come so much from, just bullying people, for example, or something like that,
And I think one of the things that we don't recognize, and this was one of the things that dawned on me in my old business, where we did settlement for some of the largest companies in the world's supply chains, was that that money in a lot of activities is actually just an accounting mechanism. It's an accounting convenience. When you deal with it in commercial trade, it's just a way of basically debiting one account and crediting another. And the way this becomes obvious is that if you get a large-scale multinational corporation, they perform all of the same things that, say, an SMB does that works with another SMB, that works with another SMB and another SMB. But they just basically make book entries in their accounting system, and they don't have to pay anything for those. They don't have to borrow any money to basically say, I'm going to debit this account and credit this account, and they don't have to pay any interest on it. And so what you see is that the industrial era led to the centralization of production, and then centralization of capital, and then centralization of risk. And the argument is, well, that's kind of all great and good. The problem is that we're going into a world that's changing very quickly, and where the scope of change is also expanding. And that is actually locking up a whole bunch of things, so that in the supply chains that I became familiar with, what I realized is that many companies were out there that were actually far more efficient than the large multinational competitor that they were competing with. But because the average weighted cost of capital for that company was, something like 20%, it had to be 20% more efficient than the large multinational. And that has two things. First, there actually are lots of them that are, which is stunning when you think about it. If they had a lower weighted cost of capital, that means that they would actually be the winners. They would actually be taking over the markets. And so we all pay a pretty substantial price for that in what we're doing. There's another kind of liquidity, though, that isn't really related to commercial activity, and that's the liquidity to kind of buy stuff for ownership, like your home or your car or some kind of thing that's an asset, might be a depreciating asset, but an asset. That kind of liquidity isn't so interesting, I think, to have an overabundance of. I think it's less interesting. Now, historically, what most of us don't know is that there were two types of money in almost every economic system. An economist would call one money specie, and that would be something like gold or precious jewels, and the other script, and that would be like some kind of literally marketplace script or a clay tablet with writing on it and the seal of some official everybody trusted. And it was mechanisms like this. Where I think we want unlimited liquidity is around the script type activities. And what we've done since about the 1880s in the industrialized nations is we outlawed other currencies because we didn't want them competing with the government, and we wanted a way of effectively enforcing taxation. And we made it so that we had just one currency. And one currency is actually not such a great idea. Most monetary economists realize that was probably an experiment that unfortunately is very difficult to kind of unwind now, but that was not the best idea.
All right. So if we look at starting up a business, you already have a lot of experience, and you clearly also show that, Alex, in your presentation, that you need to think of a lot other than just client-vendor relationship and how you build the product and whether you do it in a lean startup way or whatever, getting some capital in. So how would you see where there are so many plans? Are there any things you would suggest startups to do? Because as a startup founder, you also know that you have the feeling you don't have time. So if you would say, well, this process will cost me half a year or a year, I can't wait because I have to get the product out. So you have that urge because you have the vision. You want to you want to build that product. You want to get it out, and you say, well, people will invest, and let's build it. What would be? You're taking quite an amount of time and steps. So
yeah. So it's true that because I'm also a startup founder, it's hard to feel comfortable taking your time thinking through things, and also a lot of people a lot of people do tell you, well, it's best to be first to market, for example, than to be best to market. And I don't know. I mean, there's some really experienced people who are saying this. I know that in blockchain, there's very obviously reasons to stop and think because, for example, as compared to any other technology, any other computer-based technology today, blockchain systems are notoriously hard to iterate and change. So, whereas being first to market in software is like, well, you're first to market and then you fix it and then you fix it and then you improve it and you improve it and finally you're best to market and first to market. Nice. In blockchain, it's a lot harder to do that because the decentralization imposes restrictions on your ability to update your product. And it feels uncomfortable to wait, as I've seen many project founders, hey, we really have to go soon. Well, my answer to that is like, if you're a project founder, you're not supposed to feel comfortable.
Touché.
That's true.
So it's kind of like what it is, and if you you have two choices. It's like, if you go too fast, you're guaranteed to fail. If you go slowly, maybe you will succeed.
Yeah, I would add to that. So we're one of the few projects that actually ran focus groups. Novel idea, talk to prospective customers, see what they think. And when I first talked to Alex, because the Coin Fund does represent us as advisors, I wanted to go faster, and he slow down, kid. But what I can really see the wisdom of actually in this space being thoughtful. I'd say that the two things that most of the things out there I don't think get right, and this is true of almost most businesses, is first, they don't have really a deep understanding of their customer. Mm-hmm. And you really need to, when you're designing an economic system, you really need to understand your customer. Now, before, you could try out different marketing messages, and you could see what works, and you can try different advertising campaigns and see what works, and you can still do that for marketing and advertising. But if you get your economic drivers wrong, you're really in a big world of hurt, because you went out and you made a representation to a set of people who acquired your token around a certain set of assumptions. So now what are you going to do? You could basically try to go to your community and convince them that you're wrong, and get them to agree on trying to change things. Well, how's that working out for Bitcoin? Not so great, right? That there's these people with different vested interests who like the status quo because it works really great for them, and they don't want to see it changed. And then you could just make the change. Let's say that you gave yourself the right to do that in the smart contracts and stuff you created. Well, then, there's some regulators who might take a very dim view of you having sold something to people and then basically changing it. They might say that that was fraud, that you defrauded them, no matter how well-intentioned you were or how well the thing actually turned out. You're taking a tremendous amount of risk. So this really is a space to do a lot of thinking, and make sure that you have your economics as right as you can, and make sure you have your customer well understood, because you can't make the types of changes that you could in the past to your business model. It's actually more restrictive.
Yeah, and then there was that legal part we discussed a couple of weeks ago at the Authority for Financial Markets. In how many jurisdictions are you currently moving differently? Yeah.
So we're serious business guys, and we're trying to do something, and gals, trying to do something very good, we think, for the world. And so we're very interested in doing things in compliance with regulatory bodies. So we're one of the few projects that's probably actually gone to lawyers actually around the world in the major economies of the world, and actually tried to get opinions and things, and also tried to engage with as many different regulating bodies as we could. And I can tell you that process is amazingly fraught with uncertainty. It was so frustrating initially that what we decided to do is, in many cases, we got multiple lawyers. And the reason wasn't because we didn't like the answer we got from one, but we didn't trust the answer. Because we would talk to somebody else and they would say something completely different, and we go, oh, well, I mean, over here they said this. And what you really have to get comfortable with is that you are working in this world where you are truly kind of in suspension between things that are well understood and things that are well understood, and you're somewhere in the middle. And you could be basically, wrong. No matter all your best intent to do something right, you could still be wrong, because somebody could come along later and in hindsight and basically, with hindsight, shoot you for the decision you made. So you have to get comfortable with the fact that at the end of the day, what it really comes down to is do no harm. what really came true through all of the different regulatory conversations and legal conversations is these systems are by and large set up with the intent of trying to protect people from bad actors. And so if you can, what you really need to focus on is at the end of the day, can you honestly look at it and say that, you really did try to do things correctly and have the thought of your funders and the thought of your customers in mind. And that really is what it all comes down to.
Right, thank you. So, some questions from the audience. First. Can you stand up, say your name? If you're doing an ICO, keep it within a tweet what you're doing.
No, I'm not. I'm not going to plug anything. My name's Brian Gray. I was very interested in your slide, Scott, where you showed that a discount becomes less valuable over time because obviously there's a limit, or the more you have of it, because there's a limit to how much stuff you can buy.
Yeah. It's not that it really becomes less valuable, it just becomes, you don't get all of the value you could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was interested in how that related to your comment about the token needs to incentivize or incent the users more than the investors, because it seems to me that one of the big problems we have in this world is that there's too much capital that isn't actually being deployed in capital-intensive industries.
Mm-hmm.
And whilst I can see that this discount model will help you build a network of users, those users, the bigger the network gets, the less investable capital per user for alternative assets there's going to be. Most people don't have much money to invest in these kinds of assets. So are you really going to attract more capital into capital-intensive industries, or are you just going to move things around a little bit if you don't incentivize the investors?
Yeah, so I can't think of a more capital-intensive industry than financing. Would you agree? That's pretty capital-intensive. I mean,
let's say airlines.
Well, that's a good example too. So the incentive structure is not just designed for our ecosystem, is not just designed for the average person in this audience. I mean, we're actually designing the system for everybody from rice farmers in Vietnam to the largest corporations on the planet. So the amount of money the largest corporation on the planet has to basically invest in what is in essence a license to get a future value is pretty large. And we've gotten quite a bit of interesting conversations from them. I initially thought they would be really allergic to this space. So that's one of the reasons we went to talk to them and focus groups. And I've lost my mic, so I'll try to talk loud. There it goes. What I actually found is that the blockchain right now is got such a fervor from executive boards of large corporations. They're coming to the CEO and asking him, what are we doing on the blockchain? What are the initiatives? That there is an openness that's very, very significant. And then in our space, what we found is that that many companies are looking at things like Amazon and looking at Alibaba and things like that, and they're going, we are facing an extinction level event. And if we don't look at some radical new ideas of how to basically optimize our supply chains, we're out of business in 5 years. And I've actually had that conversation with some very senior people in some very large companies. So if you look at like an airline, airlines, any asset-intensive business is really has an interesting problem. We try to treat it as if it's a commodity. We publish the prices and have airline tickets, but it has nothing to do with a commodity. The only time an asset behaves like a commodity is when it's empty or full. Those are the only two times it actually works like a commodity. Everything else is just a wild guess. But if you used a discount token, for example, to take out the capital-intensive stuff by giving that problem to your users, no matter how big they were, so might be major shippers, coming together to basically fund a new Federal Express or something, to create a package network delivery business for themselves. if they could do that at low cost and with the built-in incentive for the customer base to keep using it, and where the customer all had some governance ability to kind of say how they wanted things run, and they had transparency into the actual cost structure of the thing, my guess is if the right leader emerged with that business argument, they'd attract a lot of capital.
All right. Next question. I saw over there.
That's quite a long way.
Yeah, just. Well, oh! Oh, we didn't have this one yet. Are you okay? Yeah. Okay. Okay. All right. It was the right direction, but
Next time, this big.
Yeah. We need a bigger.
Maybe a couple hops would be a good idea.
We need some make my mic bigger cream here. Yeah. Okay. So can you please stand up and say your name and.
Yeah, Bob Emanuels from the Investment Academy. I have also a question for Scott, and it's a bit in addition to the previous question. I don't get something, and that's about the difference you make when it comes to the customer value on the one hand and the investor value on the other hand. Isn't this just an initial thing? Because in the end, over time, those two will show convergence. I mean, as soon as the investor value will exceed the forecasted future values of the total discount per customer, they will sell. And then what will the difference between your token and all the others we already have?
So that's a great question. So initially, that is what you kind of think until you actually model it out. And what's happening is that as the network grows, the value of the discount keeps increasing. And this is not obvious, but because of the math, you're constantly dividing the total fees times whatever the discount value you're awarding your network is. So let's say it's 50%, in our case, that's what it is, of what the total network fees are. Then what's happening is that you then divide that by the tokens that are basically active in the system. And since that is a controlled number, that number doesn't grow except under very controlled conditions. Whenever the network grows, the discount value for each token goes up. So each token produces a greater discount value, which means at any given point, the value of that token intrinsically is the 5-year forward value of that token. Now, 5 years is just an arbitrary number that we've used for creating its intrinsic value, but seems reasonable. And so if your network, in our case, if the network doubles in size, the actual value of the discount goes up by 75%. And the reason it goes up by 100% is because you actually drip more tokens into the system gradually over time, which we think is actually a much more responsible way. We're not doing the big bang ICO, raise $200 million all at once. Personally, don't believe that's responsible. So we're doing a drip system, which is very different. And the drip system, we're actually holding ourselves accountable to some things happening in our network before we actually drip more tokens. And this means that the growth of the system actually expands in a way where the discount purchasing power goes up. So it goes up really at the same rate that the intrinsic value of this token from sale goes up. And so once you reach a point where the value of the discount's greater than what you can personally utilize, if I got a Starbucks discount thing and I go to Starbucks every day to buy coffee, I only have so much a year I spend on Starbucks. And so eventually it gets to the point where I go in and I get it for free. I get the cup of coffee for free. It doesn't cost me anything. And so maybe I visit Starbucks a bit more frequently because of that, but there's a limit to how much coffee I drink in a day. And so at some point, the token isn't giving me any more value from the discount. It's only giving me value from appreciation. And it's at that point that my return is not as great, just in mathematical sense, as somebody who is actually using the token to actually get a Starbucks coffee at half price, let's say.
All right. So I want to end before going to the break with if anyone has a question for Alexander. Kashi, yeah? Be careful, please. Young people with glasses, they're good targets. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Kaushik. Thank you, Scott and Alex, for sharing so much valuable information. Looking at what you presented, and I missed one critical item regarding also when you look at cost of capital and the cost of transaction, is in the design as well as in your ICO. What about the interoperability with the existing economic system, and what is the cost of that? So when you design a token, you need to look at will it interoperate with the existing system, and what would it cost?
Do you want to take that?
I hope I understand the question correctly.
Maybe rephrase it.
Well, are you asking sort of by the existing economic system, do you kind of mean Ethereum?
No.
For
What I
example?
mean to say is...
The monetary economics as it exists today.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, I see. No, it's a Scott question, sorry.
So there are two ways that you interact with the monetary system today in our world. One is that one of our tokens is pegged in value to different fiat currencies. So there's a bridge coin euro and a bridge coin pound, a bridge coin dollar eventually. And the reason that's pegged is precisely so that we do not destabilize national economies. And we have an economics board that has helped us kind of understand these things. And in our original thinking, original design was not pegged. And one of the things that the couple of our economists who actually come from, one comes from the Fed Reserve, the other from a European Central Bank, and both of them said that was a bad idea because it actually reduces the ability of the nation state to basically manage its money supply and its economy. The other place where you connect is really in the banking system. And what actually kind of happens in our world is that fiat currency becomes specie. So it takes the role of gold. And that's actually a good thing, by the way, for the fiat currency. It should not devalue it. It should actually prop up its value. And the cryptocurrency takes on the role of the script in the analogy we had before. And it's very important that you can exchange these things. And so one of the things we're doing is going around the world and establishing legal entities with the proper licensing structure to be able to kind of do that, ultimately to be able to make that exchange work well.
And so, regarding the cost implications of that?
Oh, for people that own enough Sweetcoin, it's free.
All right. So last question to Alex then. In the past couple of months and I think years, you've been diving into the world of crypto economics. If you look at what's being told at current universities and how traditional economists look like this, is there a debate that needs to be out there, or what has to change to move this forward to get a much, much better understanding of how this can shape our future?
So Gabrielle, that Scott just mentioned, is an experimental economist out of Chapman University in Orange County, California. He invited me at some point to go and meet the faculty of their Economic Science Institute, and he put me in front of an audience about big of economists to talk about blockchain. And I did. And then they asked some very interesting questions, and some of them were kind of giggling at me, which I thought was amusing. And then when I came out of that talk, he said, "You did really well. I thought you're going to get murdered." And I said, and I thought to myself, why the hell did you invite me to talk? And he said, no, they're all really nice people. They're just very stubborn. And I think that's generally the case. I think for academic economists to understand blockchain will take an iteration over iteration of observing something actually happening in the wild. And nothing is yet happening in the wild. You understand? There's nothing. There's like Ethereum, Bitcoin, and Litecoin, and a couple more really interesting beasts that nobody knows what to do with. And I think scientists are rightly people who don't evaluate ideas away from an observable result of those ideas. And that's kind of how it is, and that's the correct approach. But I think we do need to have a conversation in which we come to a common understanding of the potential, and then together work the science into the discussion. You know? And the understanding of the potential, just one last point, is a lot of times people don't believe the potential of something, not because they don't think it's useful, but because they don't think that's that it's possible. And many kinds of people sometimes don't know how to distinguish the two. But I think it's really important to convince economists that this is possible, and then together work at the implications of the possibility. That would be my answer.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. Scott, Alexander, please.